Richard E. Godrow of the Air Force, James L. Felder, of the Army, Douglas Mayfield of the Army, Larry Smith of the Navy, and Jerry J. Diamond of the Marines. Those 8 body bearers, along with their commander, Samuel Byrd, will be forever etched in American history as you see video of the funeral procession.
Do we need to know what they were?
Yeah, you don't really need to know them. George Barnum was in the Coast Guard, Hubert Clark in the Navy, Timothy Cheek was in the Marines, Godrow was in the Air Force, Felder was in the Army, Mayfield Army, Larry Smith Navy, Diamond Marines, led by Samuel Byrd of the Army. Now I have 6 of the 8 signatures up there if you wanted to look at them. But there were 9 casket bearers, and they're going to have the responsibility to carry this casket down the steep steps of the Capitol to the waiting caisson. This seems a little impersonal, but they were concerned because this casket was very heavy, and those steps are very steep. It wasn't so bad getting them up. They were really concerned about getting the casket down. Timothy Cheek, you don't have to write any of these quotes down, but just listen. Timothy F. Cheek, who was a 20-year-old Marine at the time, was quoted as saying, "I was in a trance. We were kids, totally focused on doing our duty as well as we could. My thought during this duty was, don't drop the casket, especially down the steep rotunda stairs. One falter and that casket was gone." Army Sergeant James Felder was quoted as saying, "This was the part we were all frightened of. We wet our gloves and prepared, took a grip. We got it down the steps, breathed a sigh of relief, and put it onto the caisson." They were very, very concerned, and you'll see in the video it was not an easy thing to do. Well, by 10:50, the President's body was on the caisson and the funeral procession began its journey to Arlington National Cemetery. Now, as you will see in videos, behind the President on the caisson was a riderless horse with empty, reversed boots to signify a fallen leader. That's tradition. And this horse's name was Blackjack. And you'll see it very clearly in the video. It's a riderless horse. The boots are inverted backwards into the stirrups. It's tradition to honor a fallen leader and was done exactly the same way during the Lincoln funeral. The poor fellow that had the responsibility to keep that horse under control this entire processional was 19-year-old Private First Class Arthur Carlson. 19-year-old Private First Class Arthur Carlson, who was a member of the prestigious Old Guard. He was a member of the prestigious Old Guard. Anybody in here know what the Old Guard's total responsibility is in their military assignment? If you're a member of the Old Guard, what is your total responsibility? To guard the tomb of the unknown soldier, and also to perform military processionals, funerals. Very big honor. With some luck, when we get to DC and go to the tomb of the unknown soldier, maybe we can talk one of those guys that's off duty, so to speak, to visit with us. We lucked into that one year. It was pretty cool in the training. You have to be a certain height, certain weight. The training is incredible. But he was a member of what we call the Old Guard, they still exist today. Mrs. Kennedy insisted on walking behind her husband's casket during parts of the funeral route rather than ride in an automobile. Now, who does this cause grave concern to? Well, and the other, because who else is going to walk if she walks? Robert, Edward, and all foreign dignitaries that are there for the funeral. Many of them choosing to walk behind the Kennedys, again making security an absolute nightmare for the Secret Service. And you'll see it on video. Now, does she walk the entire route from the Capitol to Arlington? No, but she walks parts. And when she walks, Robert walks, Edward walks, and many foreign dignitaries. Now, to give you an idea, not since the burial of the unknown soldier 40 years earlier had there been so many foreign dignitaries in Washington, D.C. Every civilized country in the world sent a representative to the Kennedy funeral with the exception of China and Albania. They were the only two countries in the world, civilized countries, that did not send a representative. So you can imagine the Secret Service nightmare, especially just 3 days after the American president was assassinated. Well, with that said, at 12:14 p.m., the president's coffin enters St. Matthew's Cathedral, where the funeral mass will take place. They're going to have a funeral mass before the burial. So at 12:14 p.m., the president's coffin, which was transported by a horse-drawn caisson from the Capitol to St. Matthew's Cathedral, where they would conduct funeral mass. The man that will be responsible for President Kennedy's funeral mass will be Archbishop Richard Cardinal Cushing of Boston, the most traditional man you'll ever know. I mean, you'll see him perform some things at the gravesite. Very traditional Catholic cardinal. So Archbishop Richard Cardinal Cushing of Boston conducted President Kennedy's funeral mass. Catholics, what do you have at church and funeral masses? Who are some of the people that help out? Usually young altar boys, okay? One of the 5 altar boys at the Kennedy funeral mass at this time was a 12-year-old, this fellow right here, Remur Donnelly. Remur Donnelly was one of 5 altar boys that helped serve the funeral of President Kennedy. And Donnelly was chosen as one of the 5 altar boys because his father had a long association with President Kennedy. Remur Donnelly, one of 5 altar boys. Donnelly's father had known President Kennedy since they were classmates at Harvard. He eventually became a doctor. That would be Donnelly's father, after going to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and he treated both John Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy for about 10 years before Kennedy was elected president. So Remur Donnelly's father had a long relationship with the Kennedys. He went to school with John Kennedy at Harvard. He treated them medically after he became a doctor during the time that John Kennedy was in the House and the Senate before he was elected president. 50 years later, at the age of 62, this is what Remur Donnelly was later quoted as saying. Again, this was on the 50th anniversary, and he was 62 years old. He said, when you're 12 years old, you just think about how it affects you as a 12-year-old. And I guess I connected to the children and the wife. I just thought about the kids losing their father and the wife losing her husband, and how sad that was. Well, at 1:21 p.m., following that funeral mass, the body of President Kennedy was placed back on the caisson in front of the church. What is the next destination? Arlington. Okay? So at 1:21 p.m. on November 25th, 1963, following that funeral mass, the body of the slain president was placed back on the caisson in front of the church. Family members went out and stood out front, waiting for the president's casket to be secured on the caisson, as the band played Hail to the Chief. And as the band played Hail to the Chief, Mrs. Kennedy bends down and whispers something into her young son's ear. After listening to his mother, John F. Kennedy then stood stiffly and gave a final tribute to his father, a salute. David Powers, one of Kennedy's closest aides, was later quoted as saying, We used to salute around the White House a lot. Heads of state used to come into the White House and John would be in the balcony, even as a little boy, and he'd see them all saluting. He was always great at saluting, except sometimes he would salute with his left hand. But that day, he was perfect. So take this out. This becomes a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph. At the base of the steps at St. Matthew's Cathedral, on November 25th, 1963, you can see John Kennedy Jr. giving his final farewell to his father and they entitled that picture, "The Little Soldier's Salute." Now listen to this. His world was strangely different, in little ways the child notices but does not understand. Where is his daddy, the tall man with laughing blue eyes who had a big desk and saw lots of important people, and stooped to spank him good-naturedly, and took him on helicopter rides and called him John John? This was supposed to be the day of the party. The cake with 3 candles to blow out, the friends singing happy birthday, the gifts. But this day was different. The soldiers outside, whose salutes he delighted in trying to return with one of his own, looked different. They didn't glance down at him and sneak a wink or smile today. Their commands barked, their rifles clattered. They stood at the bottom of the steps. Pallbearers appeared at the door with the flag-draped casket, and as it came slowly toward them, Mrs. Kennedy leaned down and whispered to her son. He stood apart, straightened stiffly, and raised his hand in salute as the casket passed. A little boy at his grieving mother's side saluted the passing casket, and in that moment he suddenly became the brave soldier his father would have wanted him to be on this day of all days. For today, John F. Kennedy turned 3. That's sad. Pulitzer Prize winning photograph, "The Little Soldier's Salute." Well, after this emotional event, the processional continued its journey to Arlington National Cemetery. At 2:54 p.m., the funeral procession arrives at Arlington. And when the processional reached the burial site, the Marine band played the Star-Spangled Banner. So at 2:54 p.m., the processional arrives at Arlington Cemetery, and when the processional actually reached the burial site at Arlington, the Marine band played the Star-Spangled Banner. One of the members of that band was a sousaphone player by the name of Ed Simmons, and he was quoted as saying this: "I thought as we were going up to the gravesite, because it's quite a steep hill, that my God, there are muscles I haven't used in months. Probably what sticks in my mind the most was the casket. The humongous weight of it, seeing these body bearers struggle to carry it up the hill to the gravesite, it was really a struggle." And you'll get a chance to walk up that hill, although it's a lot different than it was then. After the Marine band completed the banner, Star-Spangled Banner, the United States Air Force pipe band, including member Jerry Cashin, played Mist-Covered Mountain. Anybody know what that would be about, or what a pipe band is? Where does it originate? Where? Close. Ireland, where Kennedy was from. They had an Irish pipe band sing as well. You'll see that. Or not sing, but play. They played Mist-Covered Mountain. At this point, they removed the casket from the horse-drawn caisson and carried it. The casket bearers carried it to the gravesite. And as the casket bearers were placing the president's body on the gravesite, 50 fighter jets, representing all 50 states, flew over Arlington National Cemetery. So as they're placing the casket onto the gravesite, 50 jets, 3 at a time, come over Arlington Cemetery, representing all 50 states. Those 50 jets were followed up by Air Force One in a final tribute to its commander-in-chief, who had given his life for his country. One of the men that witnessed that it took to, was Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff. Remember, Malcolm Kilduff was the man that announced the president's death in Dallas. And he was quoted as saying, after witnessing these jets, he said, "Suddenly, seeing this flight of fighters came across. Just streaming jets with one plane missing from the formation. That was heart-wrenching. Then Air Force One coming from the same way. I never saw a plane that size fly so low in my life. As it came over, it tipped its wings before it took off and gained altitude." After that, a 21-gun cannon salute followed. And after that, 7 riflemen fired 3 volleys each, the final 21-gun salute to the president. So they fired a 21-gun cannon salute, followed by 7 military riflemen firing 3 volleys each, the final 21-gun salute. Unbelievable story here. What would be next? What would be the last thing they would do? The playing of... Boy, you guys are not military. Music people, the playing of taps. Okay? So the final tribute would be the playing of taps by Army bugler Sergeant Keith Clark. He was the lead trumpet player in the United States Army Band. Now think about this if you're Keith Clark. Early that morning, he received a phone call ordering him to sound taps at the funeral. You're standing there all by yourself. Some of you people in music probably understand the pressure of that. But this is at the funeral of the President of the United States. And Clark was later quoted as saying, "So I was there to play at 12:15 p.m. It was a rainy day and we weren't allowed to wear overcoats. So I stood there in the drizzle for 3 hours. It is like the Speaker of the House saying, 'Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.' It's not all that hard to say, but to do it then and do it there, that's when the pressure really comes. That's when it becomes difficult all of a sudden. A lot of people can sing in the shower. His point is you can sing in the shower, but if you get out in front of a bunch of people, it's not so easy. Well, to be in the view of the television cameras, Clark was ordered to stand 5 yards from the squad of riflemen who fired those volleys. And he was standing there also during the 21-gun cannon salute. So when Clark was called upon to sound taps at 3:08 p.m., the guns had momentarily rendered him deaf. He couldn't hear a thing when he was playing. Well, on the 6th note, Sergeant Clark fluttered off key and then went to complete taps without a flaw, but he missed the 6th note. William Manchester wrote a book called The Death of a President, which I have over there, and he talked about what he referred to as Clark's broken note. And he said, widely regarded as a deliberate effect, like a catch in your voice or swiftly stifled sob. Later, Sergeant Clark referred to the broken note by saying, "I missed a note under pressure." The bugle is on display at Arlington National Cemetery. We will have a chance to see it. Now this is really great. There's a guy named Tom Sherlock. He was a senior historian at Arlington National Cemetery. And in 2001, he remarked how Sergeant Clark's flawed sounding of taps seemed entirely fitting. He said, "It showed the tension that the nation felt. It's part of the emotion. It's when a speech is well delivered and a voice cracks because it's an emotional time. It's what should happen. And in that way, it almost personalized it and made it immortal." The broken note. You want to see it? That's what we'll end today. I'll show you the broken note. There's a story behind it. We'll watch that the rest of the period. Kellyana, my dear, if you could get the lights and the